This is Assessment 1A, Let Me Explain, for Contemporary Issues in Entrepreneurship and Innovation by Rowan Flair Stout. The article I'll be explaining is titled The New Population Bomb and is written by Virginia E. and Professor John T. Hazel Jr. from the George Mason School of Public Policy under the pseudonym Jack A. Goldstein. Now, the article itself was published in Foreign Affairs in the January to February 2010 edition, specifically Volume 89, Issue 1, page 31 to 43. The article itself reports that there are a number of major demographic trends that will affect international security in the 21st century. It provides data and analysis as evidence and offers policy recommendations. Now, the article itself is split up into several sections, the first of which is titled The 4 Megatrends That Will Change the World. Here the article states that global population growth will slow and potentially stabilize by 2050. Thus, it will be population distribution that matters rather than net growth. The next section is titled Europe's Reversal of Fortunes. Here, a review of historical data allows for a prediction that the Western civilizations will decline in comparison to the rest of the world. Specifically, it suggests that 80% of global economic growth will be outside of Western countries as the developing nations catch up to Europe, America, and Canada. The next section is called Aging Pains. Here the author states that developed countries are expected to lose workers to retirement at a faster rate than they are entering the market. By 2050, half of the population is expected to be over 60, and as such there will be a massive decline in productive capability. The next section is titled Youth and Islam in the Developing World. Here the article states that 9 out of 10 children under the age of 15 now live in low-income developing nations, and that therefore around 70% of the following population growth will be in these developing nations. As the majority of these are Muslim nations, it appears that the West will need to mend its relationship with Islam. The next section is titled Urban Sprawl. Here the report states that the urbanization of poorer developing countries will provide a breeding ground for crime and unrest, as the developing nations will be unable to provide the necessary infrastructure required to control each city, such as basic supplies, policing, and so on. The next section is titled Diffusing the Bomb. Here the author splits the world into 3 sections: the aging developed world, the young and economically healthy developing nations, and the very young but poor developing nations. The author states that the aged and developed world, such as the NATO nations, must start improving nation relations with the healthy developing nations and start to undo the damage to the relationship between the Middle East and Western civilization. The next section is titled Creative Reforms at Home. Here the author comments on several policies based around increasing fertility rates or streamlining immigration into developed countries, mostly as a way to reduce the impact of the aging population. The author also suggests that if the retirees were to immigrate to developing countries, then it would lessen the strain on the developed countries' medical systems, while the developing nations would be able to provide the labour required and receive a shot in the arm, and their economy will receive a shot in the arm from that. Now, the relevant parts of this article to an entrepreneur is that an entrepreneur must keep an eye on current and future trends, mostly so that they can take advantage of any opportunities as they appear. The article covers a potential issue that will shape the global business environment in the future, so a successful entrepreneur must take this into account when they are planning any long-term strategies. Now, the next section is interesting ideas, things that I noticed when I was reading the report. This is hard to say, however I did find several that I liked. Specifically that the author keeps on finding multiple reasons for mending relationships between the Western nations and the Middle East, mostly because they come from an economic perspective which I just hadn't considered before, so I thought that was quite interesting. The next idea that I liked was the way of structuring the world into using the new model, that is, developed nations, healthy developing nations, and essentially unhealthy developing nations. This was a lot more relevant than the first, second, third world that has previously been used. Now, I have previously known that a large number of workers will be leaving or that they'll be aging out, so to speak. However, I didn't know that the sheer number of them that would be doing so, I thought, a third maybe of them will be leaving, and that wouldn't go worse than that. 50% is a lot more than that, so I thought that was pretty interesting. Lastly, Europe's potential to be minimised as a major economic power was something that I was frankly a little bit shocked about. It wasn't completely unexpected, but when it was explained to me and the reasons why made a lot more sense than just the general background knowledge that I have of the economy as it is today. Now, as the shortcomings of the article, I did notice that the authors didn't tend to take into account the advances in biological and medical technology in the future. Current technological progress is advancing considerably, specifically into the biological and medical field, as I mentioned, and it's my belief that there will be a medical and biological revolution that could have an effect as large as the industrial revolution had previously. So I think things won't be as bad as they've said for those reasons. Now, for things that I didn't really notice or know about before, I never really know about why people referred to things as the first and third world. I knew of the first world and that they were the richer country. Third world was the less rich countries, but I had no idea why they were called that. Finding out that the second world countries was actually the developed communist countries was actually pretty interesting, so that filled in a few gaps that I'd had previously. Lastly, the historical data that the article used was, well, it was frankly, it was something that I haven't seen anywhere before. No history books, nothing online. This is the first time I'd come across this information. And it explained things that I'd always questioned before, but never specifically gone and looked for, because I never even thought to look in these particular areas. So that the perspective of the Western economy from a historical perspective is fascinating, and I'm very grateful that I found this. Thank you.